Hey, Maddie, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, Michelle, today we're going back to writing. I'm a professional writer, and I have broken down probably what I think are the five biggest overall factors to good college essay writing that play into my background as a nonfiction memoir writer. You'll often see that there's a lot of differences between what I think makes good writing and what you may read elsewhere. Should be a good time.
Awesome. Can't wait.
So I made an outline of the five core aspects of writing that I focus on and realized that this list could be like 5,000 things. And it could also, everything on here, I could easily do my own 25-minute show on. It's like, it turns out that professional writing is complicated and there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And I actually struggled figuring out how I was going to introduce writing because I something I promised, something I want this podcast to be about is like how to actually write a college essay. And I figured that the easiest would be to just really think about like what five things define what I think a good college essay is. And this is a basic combination of my personal views on nonfiction writing. Like I am a nonfiction memoirist. So a lot of this stuff is directly pulled from my views on writing and how I do it, but it's really blended with my takes on college writing and what these schools are looking for and what's effective. Would you like to hear them, Michelle?
I can't wait.
Yes, I've asked. This is the one topic I asked it. It's like, can you guess what the head what I'm doing, and then not see could this could guess even a single piece of like what I think is good writing. So that's like okay, like okay. This is a and a lot of these will directly contradict other styles of writing of a college writing that you may have heard, and I'll bring that up when it's the case, but not all of them. This one does though. So number one is memoir, and I'll be using the term memoir going
Mhm.
on. Basically, that's the style of writing that I believe college essay writing is. So, like, when I use memoir in this context, it means like college writing.
Okay.
Memoir is a writing style dependent on memory and reflection with an emphasis on authenticity and believability. So, this one is the closest to like a thesis statement of what I believe good writing is. Uh, Memory and reflection. Those two I think about a lot, and that's very different than setting a scene or presenting or like making the reader feel like they're there.
Right.
That that isn't what memory and reflection is. Memory reflection is it's kind of like that in that when you're trying to like remember something like there is definitely aspects of a scene or what have or what's going on, but that's very different than saying what color the couch was or exactly what someone was saying. It is instead more kind of envisioning like what was going on and trying to get the key messages of it, and then the reflection is basically an analysis of what doing so. So,
Makes sense.
mhm, and I broke this in, like, in memory, no quotes unless they're short and traumatic or from a written source you could theoretically relocate. So this is, like, my big thing is I don't like quotes in these essays whatsoever. Like, you've seen the work of my students. It's very rarely just quotes of any type.
Right.
And if they are, I think like one student this year has something that I would call quotes in their personal statement. But what it is it's his own mind, what he's saying while doing something. And it's almost like mantras over and over again. So like if you're going to use quotes, if you're going to use or you're going to straight up describe exactly what something looked like or smelled like or what have you, it better be very obvious why you're able to do so. Like that's where the authenticity comes in. It's not as simple as just, like, always tell the truth or don't make stuff up. It's like when you're writing things, a core component should be is, like, is it believable that I can remember this the way I remember it, and that I'm basically describing it the way like, how it really was, and if so, how? And it's a little thing to be thinking about, and it might not seem that important, but if you don't do that, the person reading it is going that's often where they're gonna kinda be like, "Okay, whatever." Like, it's if they read something that they don't intuitively believe is accurate that you could remember that perfectly, it's a very common place people will drop out, and that's why quotes are so dangerous and don't work so well because they're inherently kinda tacky and inauthentic because you don't remember what your teacher said 12 years ago. You don't remember
Yeah.
exactly how cold the water was when you jumped in it. You just don't, like, and I get kinda, like, silly about it. It's like, you were jumping from 25 feet. You had adrenaline. You don't remember. It's not that simple, but it's something I'm very cognizant of in writing, and I do but like to think in my personal writing, my students writing, like, authenticity and believability, and honestly, likability is a very key aspect of why it's successful, and it's because I'm considering those aspects. So, like, everything here passes the smell check, if you will. Um, right here, memory is are allowed to be biased or imperfect, but you should make that apparent. I guess is that but because it's memory, you are allowed to recall something the way you recall it, if you
Yeah.
will, and by nature, memoir has a what is it? It's a non that's unbelievable. A non something narrator. Help me, Michelle. Help me. It's
Oh,
a
is it the omniscient that you're
non-reliable.
Oh,
No, no,
oh,
non-reliable
reliable, okay.
narrator. You are inherently unreliable as the narrator of your own life story, and that's okay. It's that's why I think many episodes ago we talked about a girl, like what other people thought about her and how she was dressed. That's okay, but that like what it should instead be is like it's your reflection. It's how you felt. It's like I felt like everyone was making fun of my clothing. I felt like she didn't like me because of these things. Though that's totally okay, even if that's not necessarily true, because that is basically how you recall it, you know?
Right,
And uh yeah, and this basically there's a lot of little writer tricks we'll get into. This one in particular, like I remember I had a student, also when you're recalling something, you should kind of try to imbue like the mindset that you were when it was happening. And I remember like little kid stuff comes up a lot. So we work with
mhm,
17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and they often write about being a child. And one of my big rules for that is that while you're writing about being a little kid, you need to kind of invoke the mind of that child. So I remember there was
right,
a random student who came up for one session and he had it was an essay about how like when he was a little boy, his friend, like 6 years old, his friends had two gay parents, two men parents. And the state of Massachusetts like wouldn't let them get married. This was because the timeline was it was like 2003, if you remember. Like, so that's the time, 2019. I mean, this kid. And then he writes like, I was enraged with the indecency of such a but and I'm like, whoa, I'm gonna cut you
a
off.
little six-year-old full of rage.
I'm gonna cut you off right here. You were 6. You weren't any of these things. So that's probably yeah. I always bring that story up is that there should be a believability to like everything you're thinking at all times, and that's very important for students in this line of writing because often you're going to remember things when you're a lot younger, and it's important that you're remembering, I suppose, like how you actually felt at the time, realistic to how it actually felt. You cannot go ahead and implement your current mindset and you're right into 12-year-old unless you're specifically saying that. It's like you're right. Like I was, I now look back at that and knowing like that this is what was going on. That's okay.
Mhm.
But that's kind of how you have to present things is how you actually were at the time.
Like, don't be
And
the 17-year-old reinterpreting the six-year-old. You have to go
right,
back and be the six-year-old.
right. But you can be a 17-year-old reflecting upon and analyzing what happened as a 6-year-old, but it's different. And then there's memory and there's reflection. And I say reflection can take place during or after the story in question. Honestly, after is probably going to be easier for students to handle. I think that we'll kind of get to the narrative structure next. But yeah, you can like it's totally fine to switch kind of timelines or so like at the time I felt this, but now I better understand what was going on, right? That's
Right,
totally fine. Generally though, it's simplest if the stories kind of go in a linear fashion. You're a little kid doing this stuff, and then you jump to well, now I'm 17, or now when I was 14, I thought this about now I'm 17. Like that's often going to be simpler, but those are the two key components of the writing. And neither of those involve setting a scene, making the reader think they were there, uh, see letting you know what you saw, touched, smelled, like, I
right.
keep thinking that phrase, and, like, you could do that, I guess, like, it's not like it's however, that's not what I focus on whatsoever, and also it's a waste of words, a lot of this essay writing is about word counts, and that's probably my big reason I completely reject that style of writing is if you write 100 if you write 200 words about the taste of the bread or what have you, that's just wasted word count. You talking about, like, the conversations you had with your grandma and, like, why it mattered to you and, like, what's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, this is always going to be number 1 because it really is the style of writing, like, what I focus on.
It's kind of wildly different than what you see on the internet. Like, if I Google college essays, it's all about setting the scene, it seems like.
Yeah, and I go over why I think it was actually the first episode we did. I go over why I think that's the case, and the short answer is that's a different style of writing, like, that's one-man stage play, that's dramatic reinterpretation, and that is a style of reflective nonfiction, technically, this is actual memoir writing, and that's
Mhm.
why I keep harping on that, it's like memoir is about you describing the events of your life as you understood them at the time, and then reflecting upon them now with more experience and understanding, and that works yeah, it works well for college essays, and it's easier, like, that's gonna be a key focus of this is, like, this I hope people listen to this and be like, "He's saying a lot of different things, but man, this does seem, like, more logical and an easier essay to write because that's what it is." Okay, so we go on number 2. narrative structure is essential. And I would say of all my skills as a professional writer, structure is probably my strongest,
Mhm.
and particularly paragraph structure. I really have I believe a world class sense of like understanding how to put paragraphs in a certain order so they flow naturally and make a cohesive thought. Um, so it's something I focus on a lot with students. Similarly, I would say the number one thing problem I have with students as they're said to me is that they are having the structure is out of line. Like it's a bad structure. It doesn't, and
Right.
because of that, the essay either doesn't make sense or it just kind of falls apart because there's no coherent thought that's being held throughout it. As I write here, every essay should have a central theme, message, story, and intended takeaway that is supported throughout the piece. And that seems kind of obvious, but a lot of essays fail this pretty straightforward concept that and all this should be I think the writer should kinda know what the goal is, at least by the time they're done writing it, and the reader should definitely be able to say what these are. So central theme, message, story, intended takeaway.
Right.
There's a lot of hate on, like, the 5-paragraph structure essay, it's like, throw
Mhm.
out what you learned in English class. I actually feel like that's closer to accurate than what a lot of students do, and that if you wrote a 5-paragraph, like, structured essay for a college essay, it would be better than just winging it, I think.
Yeah.
I broke down difference here. A 5-paragraph essay I described as A leads to B, C, and D. Like B, C, D, and E are all topic paragraphs that all link back to A where the thesis is.
There's still, like, a plan there.
Yes, yes, but B, C, D, and E are all kind of independently linked to A as a supporting paragraph. I say more A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, leads to E. Like that is probably the structure that makes the most sense. And I tend to go what's the term for based on the timelines, like, almost every
Mhm.
student, we start with the earliest part of the story, then it's the second part of the story, then it's the third part of the story, then it's the fourth part of the story, then it's the conclusion slash the analysis, and that's to keep things simple, but in general, you can get weird with this kind of stuff, but this isn't the right area to be, like, doing timeline stuff or anything like that. It's usually just, like, A leads to B leads to C. The key is that that link needs to exist. A needs to link to B, which needs to link to C, which needs to link to D, which if there's no transition, if there's no logical understanding of why these paragraphs are related, the whole thing falls apart. And I see that all the time.
Mhm.
That one of my biggest reasons, like this reads like two different essays. Something I've said over and over and over. This reads like three different essays over and over and over again, with very like weak transitions between them. So A should still basically be the introduction to the essay, but it should also be kind of like you should write it knowing what, is going to come from it. It should all be one coherent thought.
Okay.
Essays should not ramble, which is ironic considering how I talk, but, like, that's why I like writing because it allows me to be like, I did all the ums, like, on TikTok with the pop-up thing. Essays should not ramble. I do believe that the reason that essays do tend to ramble is that students go into essays without knowing why they're writing it or what the goal is, and that's what leads to a situation like it's like I call it like being like in a boat in the ocean where you're 200 words into a 500-word essay, not knowing what you're planning to write or even why you're writing it or who it's for, and it's like an
Right.
type situation that leads to rambling, just trying to get to the finish line, and that's how you end up with a like different essay entirely because you kind of you need to have that, like, you need to have an understanding beforehand of, like, what you're actually gonna write in order to not fall into that trap. It's also it leads to the writing itself often getting very choppy and awkward and people using cliches and
Yeah.
all sorts of terrible writing that is almost always weaker than what the student, like, can do normally. I've worked with a lot of writers, and when it seems like their writing is like a get 1 to 1.5 levels below what they're actually capable of. That's why they don't bring in because they enter that weird no man's valley of, like, not knowing what they're doing. They end up with writing that is just bizarre. Another problem I see is what I refer to as daisy chaining, which is still like that A leads to B leads to C leads to D leads to E. But like A just leads to B, which just leads to C, which just leads to D, which just leads to E. It's a pair I brought up where it's like I was in math class learning about Pythagoras. I don't know math. Pythagoras' second law. A teacher mentioned a musical, like a Beethoven play that plays upon such structure. I then went and tried it out in class. Like in doing so, it was like I was charted back to 16th century Greece. You see where I'm going with that?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, that essay sucks. Don't do that, kids.
There's not, like, a link that goes through all of the paragraphs. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, so I guess it should be A is equal to and links to B, which like A, B, C, D, E, like that it needs to all really it should be like A leads to AB, which is ABC, which is the ABCD, which is the ABCDE. Like I'm trying to build my own narrative structure here.
Right.
And that's the idea. And how do you make this is build an outline. So this will be its own episode, I think, and I'll go over actual outlines with other students. This is probably the last writing episode I plan to do before I start actually introducing real students I work with in their work. I think it's time to start showcasing it. But I also want to be showing the outlines we did to get to that work. And outlines can be like they can be light or they can be heavy. But you really need is like if you can make that A, B, C, D thing, that'd be very helpful. And each one being basically the what that paragraph is about. Or it could be 6 paragraphs or whatever. It's like you should have the core thoughts you want to be getting, as well as you can go up here and write down. It's like the central theme, the message, the story, intended takeaway. Like have those down, and like you can write like what those are going to be in the essay. And intended takeaway is really up to you, I suppose. Um, that will help you a lot. And then you can also fill in like the lines underneath it. I have an outline right here, and it's kind of sloppy and messy, but like it's very helpful ahead of time to do that. If only so while you're writing, you're not going to get confused about like what you're trying to do. You should think about these things ahead of time.
Right.
Okay, number 3. Michelle, you don't show a tour. I screwed it up. Okay. No, leave that in. Leave it in, Charlene. Michelle, you don't show a story, you tell it. Eh? Yeah, da, da, da,
Don't
yeah.
show, you
Yeah.
have to tell.
Right. So I hate show don't tell. I think it's the worst goddamn advice in the history of writing. It is the checkmate atheist of writing advice. It is the just have fun with it of writing advice.
Oh
It is the
gosh.
have you tried not being depressed of the writing advice. It's useless, and at best, it doesn't mean anything, and at worst, it is actively detrimental to what I believe is good writing, especially in this mindset.
You're just going against all of the
Yeah,
conventional
well,
advice.
and you've seen my students work and you've worked with it. Like none of these are wrong. Like this isn't how I
That's
do it.
true, yeah.
Yeah, and that's yes, I tend to focus on ones that were particularly kind of going against the normal grain. And I hope their students reading this and be like, yeah, I hate that advice. I don't even know what that means. It's like it's useless, kids. The guy doesn't know how to write. So shout out. So there's a lot of different cliches about like what a college essay should do, and I tend to mostly disagree with, I would say, the majority of them. Stuff there's always one that's like, so they should be able to pull your essay off the floor and like know it's you. I'm like, nah, that doesn't really matter. You know, it's not that I like super disagree with them. It's often like that's not what I focus on. It's not that important. Oh, it's like an essay only you could write. Like, no, that's totally wrong. Like that's not it.
Right.
But what I do kind of like, and I find it interesting that these almost contradict, is you should pretend you're telling a story to your grandmother or your friend or someone, and that should be the essay that you write. And I've always liked that one because that's definitely the closest. But I always
Mhm.
found it interesting that's you often said given as advice, and the same person will be like, "Show, don't tell," because
Right.
that's like the idea of go like simply go back and read like college essays, and you're like, what are we doing today, Maddie? Boom, crack. It's gonna be a I I I sit down in my chair, I get ready, prepare the best podcast. Like that's weird. That's not how you like tell a story. I don't know, and maybe why nonfiction memoir writing always came so naturally to me is that I'm also a strong storyteller, I think, is that it's just like I inherently like telling stories, and I always have since I was a little kid and make them funny and all that stuff. And writing for me was always just like, well, let's write it down and like and make sure it makes sense how I'm putting it together.
Mhm.
That mindset is pretty much, I think, the correct one for college essay writing is that it's you should really focus your time and energy on telling a good story. And you tell a story, you don't show it. The closest I've gotten to that is basically tell then explain. But that's yeah, he tells stories like Michelle, like you'll never believe, tonight for Halloween, I'm giving away stuffies to kids, right?
Yeah.
Well, and then that's how I tell the story.
Mhm.
I know explain it. Be like, I won them all in a Japanese arcade over the last year, and now I'm handing them out to children. Yeah, like that's often what the actual writing my students reads like. I use the term anchor, um, which is it's an outline concept where I will help them come up with a concept and just sample. It's like yeah, it's Halloween. It's like I love going to the arcade and winning stuffies. And I'll use the term anchor, which will be like, okay, give me give examples basically. Give me 2 examples of how you go to the arcade and like how you're able to like win things that you bring back and put them in your house. And I use that concept because it allows the student to then go home and work on their own because it's hard for me to often mine these stories out of students live while we're on Zoom together. So instead, I use the term anchor and I tell them exactly what I want, and you end up with a bring back a paragraph where it's pretty much they do it. It's like the paragraph of like the story and then like key examples of the two.
Mhm.
And that works super well because you do get that kind of show don't tell version of it where it's really what show don't tell needs is like provide more details. Don't just say like I'm very brave.
Right.
How are you brave? Like what does that mean? And I get that concept, but you don't show that you don't you don't showcase that by giving like a couplet story of you climbing a mountain, like, and all that stuff. Like all the creative concepts that go into what students think show don't tell means, it falls apart because that's just a bunch of like world building fiction crap that I don't like. So
Mhm.
I the idea behind show don't tell, what it really means is don't just state things without any evidence or explanation. And part of part of it being about memory and analysis, or memory and reflection, like, yes, you do need to back up what you were saying, and that goes to the authenticity part. So, but how you get there is very different than, simply showing. Like, the word show doesn't mean anything to me. I guess there's multiple ways to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, 4. Good writing tells a complex message as clearly and digestibly as possible. And this is where I knew I was starting to cook about real writing, because there's like 90 different this is like a half a page of outline that I have to cover, but I'll just read some off of it. This one's complicated. This one's more about good writing. Theming devices, metaphors, and all sorts of creative writing concepts are allowed, but only if they are authentic and integral to both the plot and you as a person. I'm just gonna read these. In general, the content of the essay should be the main focus. If you're not sure if you can pull off a more complex concept, don't. Okay, yeah, I think big words are fun and have their place, but they're really not that important. Similarly, the goal of writing should be to impress, influence the reader via the quality of storytelling and message held within, not by the prose itself. The number two criticism I have of students' work is I don't understand what they're saying. Yeah, so I think these all cover a good idea of what I think good writing reads like. Is that um, I believe a lot of students try to do too much with their college essay,
That's true.
and it's hard for me because I think like the word choice one, I don't wanna be the guy that's like, "Never use a big word, like, never use metaphor." Like, no, those are all on the table, they really are. I often think back though to actually my 10th grade Spanish class, in which I managed to pass with a C minus, because I realized halfway through the year that on all the tests, when whenever they wanted me to, like, actually write something, like a paragraph, instead of doing what they asked, if I just wrote the most rudimentary Spanish possible that technically answered the question, like, "Me llamo Matt," like, "Me gusta mi gato Perry," and I just did that, and, instead of what the lesson plan was on, I'd get, like, a 70 out of 100 because if I actually tried, I'd get, like, a 12 because I had so many errors in it. That's sometimes how I feel about college essay writing, that if you just, like, stick to just telling the story. Yeah, you just tell a story, you just and then the best you can, and then reflect upon it, what it means to you. That will go further than, I guess, trying something bolder and failing.
Right. And it goes back
And
to, like, being authentic too.
yeah, yeah. There's definitely an aspect of, like, sizing yourself up in this process that even the students I work with, I kind of figure out what their inherent, I guess, writing ability, but also their strengths and weaknesses are early on, and then try to push them from there. But I That's why it's so fun to work with English major students, because we can do, like, weird writer stuff, and to be honest, like, that stuff never works out as quite as well as, like, we want it to because of workouts, that's often the thing is I would say that and yeah, next time we'll actually go into some essays, but, like, there's often I think, like, what I take pride in with my students' work is, like, the clarity and polish, I would say, are the
Mhm.
2 aspects that I really appreciate of students' work, and those are the 2 things I'm really emphasizing. It's like, um and that is because we're focusing on, like, a strong narrative and a strong plot structure, and those aspects of it are super important because when I read the essays, like, they make sense, that every paragraph makes sense, and then there's a cohesive message within them. Similarly, that is by far the number one thing that I find myself frustrated with, or see problems with the vast majority of student essays, is that they just don't make enough sense. And I think that's because, I guess that leads to 5, which is focus on telling the best possible story the best way possible, allowing any personal characteristics or views to speak for themselves. I guess that wait, no, I skipped to 5. That's a 5. No, let me finish 4 first. Yeah, 5 is basically it's about priorities, about what you're trying to do while writing. And the w going back to 4 is, like, if you're focusing on trying to impress the reader with the actual prose you're using, I think that's a mistake. And I say that because, like, there's use for, like, cute lines or jokes or things like that, but often the best writing is going to be clear and to the point and simply explain what is going on. I think if there's one thing people are often surprised about in my students' work is, like, it's very telly, like, it's very straightforward and often and it's still well written, it's still interesting, but it's extremely to the point and it moves. And I think that is good because in doing so, we're able to encompass a lot of different content, like that is important, especially for like with the limited words in a college essay to be able to be like compact and efficient in getting things across. And that does leave
Yeah.
more space for analysis at like during and after the piece. Yeah, with the 5 though, is this one again goes directly against the grain of a lot of college essay writing. It's like what is it? What's the term? It's the uh like values system of college essay writing. And this one I don't have this one is not me burying anything that's wrong. It's true. Like you do need to get across your core values and what you care about in your essay. But I think you also want to get off across a lot of other things like what major you want to do and what interests you academically, and simply present the idea that you're like a good kid who likes learning, which we've talked about. Um I I s- it's more that I simply in no way when working with my students at any point in the process am really focusing on core values or characters or personality traits. It's not something I personally emphasize at all when working on the students. Instead, I'm emphasizing a cool story with a good topic that has a good logical narrative and then a good authentic analysis of that event with the student. Those are the priorities. And I do so with the knowledge that almost like there's some magical fairy dust of that process that on the back end, when the essay is done, it is well, it's good and it reads well and it has it has all the things I want, like a good plot and just a good plot and it makes sense and it's well written. But also, yeah, if you want to then go dig deeper into it, it's like, oh yeah, there are personality traits too. You're
Mhm.
diligent, like you're fun, like you're gregarious, and they tend to very well match the personality of the student in a way that I think is very effective. And my theory on that is that in being authentic, in being genuine, and really write about what's actually happened to you, how you actually feel about it, well, naturally, your natural characteristics and your personality and your values are going to come out in that writing.
Exactly.
Um, and it makes plenty of sense to me. Similarly, what in my personal writing, I never have once written anything being like, how do I wanna come off in this? That's not my mindset. It is, what do I want to say? How do I want to say it? What is the most effective way to deliver that message? And I am naturally kind of like like an erratic, kinda quirky, but I think well-meaning, pleasant enough dude, and that tends to come out hopefully in my podcast too, it's like you've seen it, this is the unfiltered version. I think that comes out just like people talking, it comes off, like when people
Yeah.
are authentic and are genuine and do tell you how they really feel about things, well, you tend to pick up, like, how they feel about things and who they are, but you also tend to like them because they're being real with
Right.
you, even if that reality isn't the most, like the most obvious takeaway. You can't be like, "They're brave. I should let them into Harvard." Like,
Exactly.
yeah, like, that kind of leaks into, like, more deep understanding what writing is that, like, people read things, and in displaying a genuine version of yourself, that is what people are going to find. They will find their version of yourself. And then, yeah, like, you do a little PR in the background, like, make sure you don't write anything that makes you come off like a bad person, but that's pretty rare too, and you've seen students
Yeah.
writing. It's pretty rare that students write something that's like, "Oh, that's a bad idea." It's
Mhm.
more about guiding them through topic, the right mindset, and the right, uh, structure in order to get there, and then you end up with an essay that first and primarily is a cool essay that works, and again, that is the focus here. It's like I like essays that have that have interesting new topics, that have different takeaways from them, and are fun to read, like, that stuff totally matters to me, and that's where 90% of my emphasis goes on, as well as them coming off as realistic and authentic, and then everything else comes from there. Um, yeah, and those are all just so those are my 5 big ones. I think I mixed up 4 and 5. Michelle, any thoughts on professional writing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm I don't have a hat here, but if I could put on a mom hat, I would put it on right now, but just my sample size of 1, you help kids become better writers. I don't know if that's, like, you mean to do that, if that's an unintended consequence. They have an amazing, like, personal statement that they, get from working with you, but, like, with my son, when he went into his freshman year of college, all of a sudden his writing, it was transformed. I'm not kidding. Like, he got amazing comments from his teachers in his English classes. He was asked even to submit something to a journal, and that was because of working with you.
Thank you, Michelle. Um, right. So I've surely noticed that, and I brought it up. I don't consider that like a core aspect of. I am a writing teacher. I do pride myself as that. Yes, we could do another episode of like why this is better. I suppose like why this style of writing is good, and that would be a big one. Is that this style of writing transfers to real life in a way that is much more practical, and that is my background. This is my style of writing because I was a blogger for 10 years, and like my style of
Mhm.
writing was about reaching people and making them understand complex thoughts quickly. Yeah, I guess I could do another 5 things about, like, why this is a better way to write an essay, but I do believe it at the top of that, I believe it gets you it's easier. It is more transferable to other styles of writing.
Mhm.
I believe the big strength of working with me, quite honestly, is that you end up with essays that don't quite read like other essays. And I believe next time, 2 episodes from now when I get back, I think it'll be finally time to introduce some essays I think worked, if you will. I think that's what we wanna do. And maybe that's when we can talk more about why I think they were effective. I think that will be that so save the praise. We have another writing episode coming, I promise.
I've got more for you.
Yeah, so we'll go back to writing. Thank you, Michelle. I think we're back with your episode next. I look forward to it, okay? See
Me
you next time.
too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching College with Mattie. For more information or a coaching session with Mattie, visit collegewithmattie.com. You can follow College with Mattie on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Tune in next week for more episodes, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.